And I also wanted to make one more a special shout out to Jeffrey, who, he's in Berkeley. So when he started, it was bright and early in the morning over there. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker and our final speaker. And our final speaker today is Dr. Kate Lepis. Kate has been recently joined our board as state botanist in response to a call I made for volunteers back at the spring meeting. So she's brand new to the NPSNJ board, and we love having her. She just wrote a great article for the NPSNJ newsletter on cultivars, and she's also the horticulturist at Deep Cut Gardens in Monmouth County Park System, which happens to have been started, or the landscaping there happened to have been started by mobster Vito Genovese, and I think there can be no more New Jersey garden than that. Okay, I mean, really seriously, and I'm like living like within a stone's throw of Tony Soprano's house. Kate's been dedicated to native plants for 30 years. Her mission is very much like in line with ours. It's fighting what she calls a disease of plant blindness, getting people to actually see the plants around them. In fact, this is what all of our speakers have been very much concerned with. Kate's going to share one of my favorite evolutionary stories in the plant world today, how aquatic plants did the exact same thing that whales did. They evolved on land, developed all these complex structures for terrestrial life, and then said, you know what, let's go back into the water, and which we'd abandoned millions of years ago. I mean, there's a if you ever watch Werner Herzog's documentary in the Antarctic, where he talks about going under the ice and seeing the terrifying things that live under there, and being like, you must have just wanted to escape, and then of course you get to land, and it's even more terrifying. You're like, oh, let's get back in the water. So in New Jersey, we have a whole gradient. Of course, we're uniquely blessed with a huge number of plant communities. We're a very biodiverse state, and we have everything from plants that get their feet wet occasionally, plants that live in seasonal pools, plants that never leave the water but are rooted in the water. I built myself what I thought was going to be a vernal pool, and then it turned into a kind of permanent pool. It's full of daylilies, and pickerel weed, and it's arrowhead, and it's just wonderful to have. But there are other plants that are a little bit different and have different kinds of adaptations. So, and in fact, they're also, as we already learned from Kadim, there also are even parasitic aquatic plants. So, or parasitic carnivorous aquatic plants. So, with that all in mind, I'm going to turn this over to Kate, and on you go.
All right, thank you. Happy to be here. It's been a very interesting morning, and I hope I can keep up with the Joneses and keep the interest going. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. Slideshow. Okay, there we are. All right. So I am here to talk about aquatic plants, and they are a really interesting group of land plants. I say that because, as we saw with part of Jeff's talk, that they share that evolutionary history. They are part of the lineage that moved out of the water onto land and paved the way for our animal ancestors to do the same. In researching for this project, it became very clear to me that aquatic plants aren't popular. Most people consider them nuisances, something that needs to be managed, maybe even outright removed. And I get it. People don't like to recreate with aquatic plants. They get all caught up in motorboat props, and they definitely don't feel good to swim through. But they really are an interesting group. And so let's take the time to get to know them a little bit better, because some of the ways that they have tackled the challenge of life and the communities that depend upon them are really quite interesting. I think it's probably easiest to start by saying what aquatic plants are not. And aquatic plants are not algae. I wish I could just define algae for you and move on, but by definition, algae are aquatic organisms that are not plants. And so obviously that doesn't help us. So what I want to do is just take a little time to familiarize ourselves with some of the big groups of algae. And I should say that algae is a really broad term. It represents many different independent lineages that have been evolving in different directions for hundreds of millions and even billions of years. So let's just take a look at some of the big ones, get to know them, and then we'll talk more about aquatic plants. Dinoflagellates, that's one group of algae. They are single-celled organisms. Algae come in all shapes and sizes. The dinoflagellates have these really cool membrane systems that give them that cool architecture. And some dinoflagellates are the symbiotic partners that coral rely upon. Others, when they grow out of control, form red tides, these harmful algal blooms. And when you have dinoflagellates at that high of a density, the toxins that they produce can be lethal to other life. We also have algae that exist as macroalgae, so big multicellular organisms like red algae. And all the red algae produce a pigment called phycoerythrin, and this is what gives them their characteristic red color. Sorry. Let me backtrack for a second because dinoflagellates also can magically bioluminesce. If you like to eat sushi, the nori that wraps your roll is red algae. So you are familiar with that if you like that. Another type of macroalgae are the brown algae, and they all have their characteristic brown color because of a pigment they produce called fucoxanthin. And the king of brown algae, and maybe arguably the king of all algae, are the giant kelps that grow off the west coast in the Pacific Ocean. They can grow to be several stories tall and form these marine underwater forests. But you know what? Here in New Jersey, we have our brown algae too. And we have species of fucus that wash up on the shores. And so next summer, when you're walking along on the beach, look for fucus, pick it up, get to know it. They have these cool little bladders that help them to remain afloat and stay up at the surface so they can photosynthesize a little bit better. You know, even bacteria photosynthesize and are considered algae. And the photosynthetic bacteria are called cyanobacteria. The old name is blue-green algae. Most recently, you might have read in the news that the Hudson River experienced its biggest harmful algal bloom on record. It went from like the New York Harbor all the way up to Troy, New York, which is close to Albany. And again, this was caused by an overgrowth of a type of cyanobacteria. You know, there's kind of a theme here going, right? Like we don't like photosynthesizers growing too much in our water environments. But the truth is that we're the ones that are putting the excess nutrients into these water bodies that are stimulating this overgrowth. But the algal bloom that luckily, as the weather has cooled, has dissipated in the Hudson River, but that grew out of control out of a combination of the drought that is going on, so a lack of freshwater input, the excess nutrients that come from the sewage treatment plants that are just always expelling into the Hudson River, and the warm waters from the very warm summer that we just got out of. And so, you know, cyanobacteria might sound like a nuisance, but the really cool thing about them is that we wouldn't be here without them. They are the oldest known photosynthesizers who actually in the process of photosynthesizing spit out oxygen. The oldest fossil of cyanobacteria is at least 3.5 billion years old. And it took about a billion years of them doing their thing, photosynthesizing, spitting out oxygen before the atmosphere became anything like we know it. And so they really are quite interesting. The last group of algae that I'm going to talk about are the green algae. And they too are pretty diverse. You have single-celled algae that move around with flagella, like Chlamydomonas, good old Chlamydomonas. You can see the two little flagella showing up in that photo there. And then there are filamentous types like Spirogyra, and they have that name to um, pay homage to the really cool way that they organize their chloroplasts in that spiral formation that you see there. There's also sea lettuce that kind of has what we call a thallus body type, sort of just like a thin layer of cells at sort of looking like lettuce. I guess I should say that green algae are mostly freshwater species, but sea lettuce is marine, and it is another algae that you sometimes find washing up on the shores of New Jersey. So when you see that too, instead of being like, there's so much stuff floating around in the water, you can pick up fucus, you can pick up sea lettuce and be like, I know you guys, and check them out. Green algae also come in macroalgae, so multicellular, bigger things that sort of look plant-like. And chara or chara is a representative of that. And so again, aquatic plants are not algae, but aquatic plants are part of the lineage of land plants, and land plants are descendants of a green algal ancestor. And so now that we know kind of like what algae are, that doesn't really tell us why aquatic plants aren't algae. But aquatic plants, because they have this evolutionary history that they share with other land plants, as the green algal ancestor moved out of the water and evolved and diversified countless times to colonize new land environments, adaptations that made land plants really good at living on land. Aquatic plants share that heritage and they have those characteristics. So I just want to go over a few of those traits, and Jeff mentioned a bunch of those. So I just want to quickly go through some. In order to survive on land, you need to have a waxy covering, and this prevents water loss. And we can see on this leaf how the waxy covering causes the water droplets to bead up and roll off. And so water doesn't get in, but it also prevents water from escaping. This is a cross section of a leaf, and this is the very surface of the leaf. And there is the waxy cuticle that covers the entire surface. Liverworts, need a drink of water. Liverworts are arguably the oldest lineage of land plants that are still alive today. And you can see that, like sea lettuce, at least in this example, still has the phallus-like body plan that you see in some green algae. And if you ever want to come across liverworts, you will find them when you buy plants at nurseries, especially if you buy the plants towards the end of the season that are on sale. Look inside the pot, and that's where I found this liverwort. And you know, in a nursery setting, things are constantly being irrigated, and so it's a nice wet environment. And you'll often find like a coat of liverworts growing on top of the soil of whatever plant you just bought. Another adaptation that Jeff mentioned are stomata. And I did not realize that Lycopodium stomata don't work as efficiently as they do in gymnosperms and angiosperms. But when you get into gymnosperms and angiosperms, they are very good at opening and closing these stomata when they want, when the environment tells them to do so. And the cool thing about stomata too is they are controlled by the plant, and they have these two guard cells, which are the cells that control the opening of and the closing of those stomata. So this again is the cross section of a leaf. Here's the waxy cuticle. This is at the very surface of the leaf. This is what a stomata looks like if we're looking down on the surface of a leaf and that one is open. This is what they look like when they're closed. And mosses are also a very ancient lineage of land plants, as we've already learned, and they have stomata, but they have stomata not in their leaves, but in their spore producing structures. And it's believed that those stomata open up to help that capsule dry out so that then the spores can be released. Another game changer for life on land was the development of vascular tissue and lignified tissue. And vascular tissue, as the name suggests, and if you look in this leaf, is the vein system in the plant. And we can see that here in the leaf. This is a cross section of a stem. And in this particular stem, the vascular tissue is arranged in bundles along the periphery of the stem. If we look at it up close, this is one vascular bundle. It's made up of specialized cells in the xylem that specialize in moving water from the roots up to the leaves. This layer here is phloem, and this is specialized tissue that moves the sugars made in the leaves to wherever the plant needs it. And one important aspect of this vascular tissue is that these cells, the xylem in particular, are lignified. And like Jeff said, lignin is this really hard substance that the plant embeds the cell wall in to provide extra support. And so there's lignin in the xylem. There's also another group of lignified tissue above the phloem here that provides like flexible support. And you can see how the cell walls are really, really thick. And you know what? This is a big hunk of lignin, right? And so I don't know where we would be without the adaptation of lignin evolving into being, honestly. I mean, all of our houses are made of lignin, right? But so lignin was the game changer that allowed land plants to grow really tall, to grow vertically, like Jeff described. Prior to that, all of the land plants were small little diminutive things like liverworts and mosses and hornworts. The first vascular plants, and I know Jeff talked about all this, but the seedless vascular plants, the ones that reproduce via spore instead of seed. And just to very briefly talk about that for a second. So like I'm going to use a fern as an example, right? And as Jeff told us, there's the lineage of club mosses that are seedless vascular plants. And then there's the lineage of ferns and horsetails that are related but separate, and they too are seedless vascular plants. But let's just take how a fern reproduces, right? They release spores. Those spores land in a very moist environment and germinate and grow. And when they do that, they form this phallus-like body, so a throwback to their green algal ancestry. And these green structures produce sperm and produce egg. And literally, the tiny little swimming sperm that gets produced has to swim to an egg in order to fertilize it. And that actually happened right here. There was an egg here, a sperm swam and fertilized, and now we have a tiny little fern growing, the form of a fern that you and I are used to looking at. And so what this means is that with vascular tissue, these plants were able to grow tall, use water more efficiently, but because they reproduce in this manner, they're always tied to this wet environment. And so when seeds and pollen evolved and came upon the scene, this was a big game changer. This really allowed plants to colonize different areas that were not possible before. And there are two lineages of seed plants, um, gymnosperms, the cone-bearing plants, and angiosperms, the flowering plants. And well, I mean, I know I've already said it, but it was a game changer, right? Because you think of the way a fern reproduces. It has this naked little sperm that needs to swim through water to reach the egg, and now pollen comes on the scene, and pollen contains the sperm that is encoded in a really thick outer wall, and now pollen is really kind of like plant sperm, right? And so that really will make you think a little bit differently next spring when you have to like wash off your car, right? But now plants can spread their sperm around via wind, for crying out loud. And so it really opened up the door of what was possible. And then of course the seed, being able to encase your embryo in this protective covering that too can be dispersed by wind. And also, not only is it in a protective covering, but it has this energy packed tissue along with it that allows your embryo to get a really great start, was another game changer. Of course, then come the flowers and the fruits, and the world changed once again. And you know, the reason that I bring all of this up, because I'm really here to talk about aquatic plants, but aquatic plants share all of this history, and they live in the water, but because of their past, they have all of these traits. And Jeff talked about an aquatic isoedes, an aquatic lycopod, but a lot of the aquatic plants that we know today are flowering plants. And even though they live in water, they have stomata, they have vascular tissue and lignified tissue. They have pollen, seeds, fruits, and flowers. And so let's uh, let's start looking at some aquatic plants now. Here's a really nice collection of wetland plants growing just on the side of a pond. We have swamp rose mallow, cardinal flower, great blue lobelia, and northern blue flag iris. And these are probably plants that a lot of you are really familiar with. And you know why? Because you can get to know them without getting your feet wet. They live in wetter environments, but they're on the higher edge of the pond. And so they're probably flooded in the springtime, but by August, if there hasn't been a whole lot of rain, they're still doing okay, but you're not going to get your feet wet when you spend time with them and get to know them. But the plants that I want to talk about require permanently flooded conditions, or at least semi-permanently flooded conditions. And so we're going to go deeper into the water. Aquatic plants exist in this habitat where land gives way to open water. And we can categorize aquatic plants based on where they are in that depth of transition. The first group I want to talk about exist right at the water's edge. They are a subset of these emergent plants that we see growing here. Some like to call them amphibious emergence because they exist underneath the water, totally submerged, but probably only like an ankle deep water. They tend to be very small, have small rosettes of leaves like you see here. The example that we're looking at here are pipeworts. Seven-angled pipewort is the example that we see here. There are 4 different species native to New Jersey. This one is pretty common. And an adaptation that we're going to be seeing in aquatic plants over and over are tissues that are full of air, because their big challenge is how do you get oxygen? How do you exchange gas, oxygen and carbon dioxide to all the different parts of your body when those parts are not just underwater, but in the muck under the water? And so when you look at the underside of pipewort, you can see how all these little squares like represent the aerated spongy tissue that makes up the leaf. These guys are called seven-angled because if you were to look at them, and I mean, these are small, like, I don't know, maybe even the flower stalks are probably like that tall. But if you wanted to, the flower stalk, it has 7 angles to it. And the only way you would really be able to see that is if you went botanizing with your jeweler's loop. And if you want to start exploring more, this is definitely a tool that you need to get your hands on. But you can see all the small little rosettes of leaves that are growing in the substrate here. And this picture was taken in New Hampshire in August. And so this demonstrates why we call them amphibious emergence, because New Hampshire is experiencing its worst drought on record. And so normally these guys would be underwater, but the lake edge has receded just enough that they are now exposed to air. But the sediment that they're growing in is still very much wet. Their flowers, they have this kind of white fuzzy look to them because there's white hairy filaments between the flowers, and the flowers are either male or female, but they exist together in that little button there. Another cool amphibious emergent is called water lobelia. And like the name suggests, and you can tell by the genus, it is closely related and in the same genus to great blue lobelia and to cardinal flower. And if you look at the flower structure of all 3, you can see that they're very, very similar, and that's because they're closely related. Water lobelia might be the weirdest plant that I'm going to talk about today. They have these tiny little strap-like leaves. You can kind of see them growing in their basal rosette, even though it's out of focus in that photo there. But these plants, these leaves, if you were to look onto cut them in half and look in the inside, they'd be like 2 tubes stuck together. And again, this is a way for gas exchange to take place within these organisms. Their leaves are completely covered in a waxy cuticle with no stomata. And, I mean, that is a trait. They lost their stomata, right? Because, of course, cardinal flower and great blue lobelia have stomata all over the place on their leaves. But so these leaves don't function in gas exchange like most leaves do. This plant relies on its root system to take care of that function. And the root system is very big for this little plant. It makes up at least 50% of its body, and it gets all of the oxygen that it needs out of the muck. The plant does not gas exchange with the water column. And so it's very cool and weird and different. But unfortunately for this plant, what it means is that, you only find these things growing in low nutrient environments. And you don't really find those around here in New Jersey, because where there are people, there are a lot of nutrients. And so unfortunately, this plant is thought to be extirpated from New Jersey. And what that means is that at least in the last 20 years, based on the New Jersey Heritage Program, there have been no records of this plant growing. And gosh, now that I know that this plant is growing on the beach at my family's house in New Hampshire, I'm like, oh my gosh, I really got to take care of this thing. I will say for a second too that the amphibious emergents tend to kind of be in trouble in our state and in surrounding states. Um, Jeff mentioned the isoedes that grow like these guys. I didn't have the opportunity to show you any of them, but we have 8 species that are native to New Jersey, and 5 of those are in trouble. And part of the problem is that they do like these low nutrient environments, but in addition to that, they tend to grow in places where there's not a whole lot of competition from other things. Even if you had not human nutrients, but even nutrients from detritus of other plants, that can cause problems for them. And if you think about anywhere or most places in New Jersey where there's like a nice open beach along a lake or body of water, people are using it. And so trampling is a problem. That's my dog. Trampling is a problem. They're also in trouble because of exotic invasive species and being outcompeted by them, but also people trying to manage those invasive species and the herbicides that they use are an additional problem. Now I want to go a little bit deeper still and start talking about some of the standard emergent species that you might see. And these guys exist maybe in like 1 feet to 2 feet of water. So we're talking this zone in here now. One species you might commonly find is American burr reed, and you'll see them like characteristically, this guy's growing out of like maybe 1.5 feet of water, and they have these long strap-like leaves that emerge and grow out of the water. These guys are all rooted in the muck, right? And these leaves are described as being keeled because the blade is actually like bent a little bit, and so it looks like the bottom of a boat. The inflorescence stem, the flowering stem, at the base kind of has this like zigzag look to it, and it has balls of either female flowers and then balls of male flowers. The female flowers are at the base of the flowering stalk. The male flowers, you can see them how they're like covered in anthers, are towards the top. This species is wind pollinated, which you might be able to tell because there's really like a lack of sepals and petals. You know, if you're wind pollinated, you don't want those flower structures because they just would prevent your pollen from being able to be spread around. But the female flowers actually have highly reduced tepals, which are sepals and petals that look exactly alike. And at the base of each one of those tiny female flowers, you will find tepals surrounding it at the base. I'm sure everybody is familiar with pickerel weed, but it's so darn pretty. How do I not include it? And they have tepals as well, but these tepals all look like petals, and there's 6 of them, and they have these nectar guides here, and you'll see bees visiting these flowers. Every once in a while, you might be able to catch a hummingbird visiting them. And the one reason I also wanted to mention pickerel weed is because they are going to demonstrate another very common adaptation of aquatic plants, and that is growing and spreading with a rhizome. And so a lot of these emergents, we're going to be looking at floating leaf species in a minute, and this is very, very common, having a rhizome that spreads and helps you vegetatively reproduce. And again, I also wanted to show you because I broke this rhizome in half, and look at all those air spaces that exist within this horizontal stem. Just again, another example of how they're really spongy because they need to figure out how to move air around inside of their body. They don't need to worry about water, but they need to worry about how do my cells breathe? And you can see how successful these pickerel weed rhizomes can be in spreading and causing thick, dense stands of it. Another emergent is broad-leaved arrowhead. They too have male or female flowers, and you'll see their flowers on the flowering stalk in whorls of three. These are male, and so you can see all the anthers. They have three petals. They have three sepals. You can see those in the flower that's gone by back there. This is a female flower, and so they have like a really big round receptacle, which is basically a receptacle is like a strawberry. When we eat a strawberry, we're eating receptacle tissue. And so a receptacle is really just like this bulk of tissue that all the other flower parts grow off of or form off of. And so you have many tiny little ovaries and their styles and stigmas. And so there again is the female flower. I know this is not the greatest picture, but it's the picture I took. And here is the arrowhead leaf. Obviously, you can see how it gets its name. Look behind it. There is the pickerel weed leaf. And so you can kind of get an idea if you're not lucky enough to see them in flower, how you can tell them apart. And the pickerel weed, like look at the veination. It's like goes from the petiole and then swoops up in all these curves as it like all the veins go up to the um tip of the plant. And did you hear what I just said? I said veins. And so if you are exploring aquatic photosynthetic creatures and you're trying to determine, am I looking at an aquatic plant? Am I looking at algae? And it's not hard with these emergents, but it's hard with the submergent species. Look for veins. If you can find veins, those babies are vascular, and you're looking at an aquatic plant, you're not looking at algae. But back to the vein pattern, right? Look at the vein pattern in arrowhead. All the veins start at where the petiole attaches to the blade, and they spread out, kind of looking like a spider. Here's another emergent arrow arum, which has very similar leaves. And I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of that flower, but they are in the same family as peace lilies or oh gosh, now I can't think of it. Jack in the pulpit, right? So their flowers don't look exactly like those, but they have that same general structure. But going back to comparing leaves, if you're out hiking around and you want to identify these things, they have arrow-shaped leaves, but notice the very strong mid vein and that the lateral veins all branch off from that mid vein. So you would say that this veination is pinnate and this veination is palmate. And that's how you would be able to tell the difference between the two. Now I'd like to look at a few floating leaf aquatics. And so you can see them all existing, and these guys really dominate the water column from, just beyond like 2 feet of water, and sometimes even going out to maybe like 10 feet. 6 is probably more of an average, but once you get beyond 10 feet, it's just a little bit too deep for them. They are all rooted in the muck, and then they send up these lily pads that rest on the water surface. So let's take a look at a few. Fragrant water lily is the first one that we'll look at, and these are the leaves. They're very round. They have a sinus that cuts to where the petiole attaches. You could probably see the sinus a little bit better in that example. Everybody knows the flower. It's so beautiful. They have four sepals that we can't see, and then many, many layers of petals. And if we look inside of the petals, we see that there are many, many anthers. And as you go layer and layer and layer in, the anthers get smaller and smaller and smaller. We say the outermost ones that are the biggest are petaloid or petal-like. And these flowers open for 3 days. And so if we take this flower and we cut it in half and we get rid of all of these flower parts so we can like see a cross section of a flower here. So what happens is on day one, the water lily flower opens, and the stigma, the female part, is arranged in a stigmatic disc. That's what SD stands for. And so the stigmatic disc is receptive on the first day, and it releases this sweet liquid that attracts insects, hopefully insects that have been visiting other water lily flowers and covered in their pollen, and they come in and they move in through all the floral parts and wash the nectar off and onto the stigmatic disc. And so this is the ovary, and these are called locules that have the eggs. We really call them ovules, but the eggs are inside of these ovule structures. This is the ovary. And you can see how the anthers get smaller and smaller and smaller. This is called a carpal tooth, a carpaloid tooth. We don't really have to worry about that, but I just want you to know what CT stands for. But that's day one, right? And then at nighttime, it closes again. The next day, it opens. And now the stigma is no longer receptive. The liquid is dried up. But now the anthers are doing their thing and they're releasing pollen. And day two, it closes. Day three, it opens again. And again, the flower is releasing its pollen. And this is one strategy that these plants evolved so they can cross-pollinate and have more genetic diversity. If we take a cross section of this leaf, imagine we take a 1 cell width section crossing this leaf here, right? And then here's a vein. So this is where you find a vascular bundle. You'll see a vascular bundle there. And if we look at it, and I have to say, Berkshire Community College Bioscience Library, awesome, awesome website. You can look at all different very well professionally prepared slides of all kinds of plant tissue, and everything is up there with public domain. Such a wonderful resource. And I love geeking out with these slides. But so here's a cross section of the leaf, right? This is the top of the leaf. This is the bottom of the leaf that's in the water. And I want you to see this. Here are vascular bundles. These are where veins would be. And look at all these air spaces that exist inside of this leaf tissue. It's really, really spongy. If we look at the top side of the leaf, the top part that is exposed to air, and we look at it more closely, this is the tissue that does most of the photosynthesizing. It has most of the chloroplasts in there. And look, here are stomata, and look, there's the cute waxy cuticle layer that it has. And notice that there are air chambers just underneath the stomata, because the main function of stomata is for gas exchange. So this is how plants breathe. And here's a little close-up of a tiny vein, a little vascular bundle in that leaf. If we now look at the bottom part of the leaf, the part that's in the water up close, notice no waxy cuticle. Also, no stomata. And this is different from the leaves of plants that are living on land. Leaves of plants that are living on land have a waxy cuticle on both sides, have stomata on both sides. Just a little side note, desert dwelling plants, they only have stomata on the underside. So there's all these adaptations that have taken place to help plants be really good at the environments in which they grow. The next species we'll take a look at is spatterdock, Nufar variegata. And let me just say one thing about the taxonomy of this group. Uh, the old system had Nufar luteae and then subspecies variegata. And that's not recognized anymore. All these subspecies have been raised up to recognized as their very own species, and Nufar luteae now designates a European species of spatterdock. So just so you can keep that in mind, if you're like using older plant guides, it's going to say luteae, but if you go to buy something these days, I don't know that I would buy something that's labeled Nufar luteae. I would want to make sure it really is one of the native plants that you're searching for. Spatterdock, these are not petals. These are sepals, and they start out green, and as the flower ages, they become more yellow, and just the base will be green. Try to ignore the pond beetles that are mating in front of you right now, and let's just try to focus on the parts of the plant. But again, 6 sepals in this species of spatterdock. Spatterdock and white water lily are closely related. They are in the same family, and so they both share the trait of having a stigmatic disc. You can see, and also many anthers that you can see underneath here. And oh boy, were these pond beetles having a good time in this flower. They were all over the place. There were a lot of them. And interestingly, spatterdock does have petals, but they're highly, highly reduced, and you would have to dissect the flower to look at them in here, which I did not do, so I can't show you. But this brings me up to a little bit of the ecology, and pond beetles are a group of insect that will spend their entire lives on these plants, on spatterdock, on white water lily. Their larvae are completely aquatic and will eat the leaf tissue, mine through the leaf tissue. Some species will mine through the petioles, and then they emerge out of the water into their adult form. And then you can see the adults are doing their thing on the flowers, and they spend their whole lives here. As thanks to the beetles, these flowers got pollinated. And after pollination and then fertilization, that flower stalk that was sticking up into the air starts to bend and now allows the developing fruit to be in contact with the water. This is another common adaptation of aquatic plants. Like they're flowering plants. They flower. They need to get their flowers out up into the air. But once their seeds are forming, those seeds cannot dry out. And so water lily that I didn't have a picture to show you, but what their flower stalks do is once there's been pollination and fertilization, that flower stalk actually starts to coil. And as it coils, it pulls the developing fruit down under the water, where once it's ripe, then the seeds are just released under the water. Spatterdock is a little bit different. Once that capsule is ripe, it explodes and shoots the seeds out across the water's surface. And then there you have that. This is a cool picture of lily pad diversity in this lake that I was paddleboarding in. And I want to show it to you for a minute to help you help you identify these species, even if you don't have flowers to go by, okay? So we have fragrant white water lily. There's a flower bud sticking out of the water, right? And again, round in shape, a sinus that goes to the petiole. But these leaves can be very plastic, and so shape can be misleading. Here's spatterdock, a much bigger leaf, also with a sinus. But look at that big main vein right there. It even is a bit concave. And when you see that, that is spatterdock. When you see lack of one, you can say, okay, white water lily. We have a third type of lily pad here that I want to show you, and that's water shield, another cool plant, and that you have a few of those up here too. And so water shield, because the petiole attaches right to the center of the blade and no sinus, and so it looks like a shield, hence its name. And these flowers are much smaller than spatterdock or water lily. I mean, I'm going to guess without having measured or anything, even a little less than a third of their size. You'll just see them in New Hampshire anyway, poking up out of the water. I don't know, in like July. So maybe a little bit earlier in New Jersey. Um, Growing in, existing in, and among underneath all of these floating leaved species, you'll find submerged species. And these plants never leave the water column. Well, their flowers do, but their vegetative parts don't. Some of them float freely in the water column. Some are rooted into the muck, but their leaves stay submerged all the time. And bladderwort fits into this group. I know Kadeem talked about bladderworts for a bit, which helps me out because now I don't have to. But I couldn't not share these examples with you. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I feel like there's a lot of species of bladderwort in New Jersey, like a lot, maybe like 14. I can't think of the name, but a bunch, right? And this one is floating bladderwort, not inflata rather, like Kadeem showed you. Utricularia radiata. They do have the same adaptation of these very spongy, air-filled leaves that act like a float that allows the flowers to get up out of the water column. But inflata is much more robust, much bigger. And so, it will be difficult to make the difference until you see them both and you can get that burned into your head. And then there's Eastern purple bladderwort that has these beautiful little flowers here, purple, white, yellow in the center. And they have a very kind of like a robust flower stalk that undoubtedly is filled with air. And this, we are looking at the vegetation of Eastern purple bladderwort, and it can be really difficult to identify bladderworts just from the vegetation if you don't have the leaves. And the only way that I know that this is purple bladderwort is because the bladders exist at the very tips of the stems or leaves. And with other species, the bladders will be existing somewhere within the branching system. Aquatic plants don't just provide food in the seeds that they make, in the vegetation that they make. They also just provide the structure that allows other life to do their thing. I mean, who thought an emergent plant would be so romantic, right? You have these two mating damselflies here. And So they provide a place to mate. They provide a place to rest, or maybe search for prey. And like pond beetles, damselfly larvae are completely aquatic, but when they finally reach the point that they come up out of the water and molt for the last time, this one decided to do it on a bladderwort flower stalk. And if the aquatic plants are providing the needs for these invertebrates, they're also providing the needs for some of the bigger species. Um, and so I don't really have the time to profile all of that for you, but I just obviously had to say that, these aquatic plants are supporting the greater food web. And if we can allow ourselves to share them with the lakes and ponds that we recreate in, our lives will just be more interesting and beautiful. I have to say for a second that this is my partner in crime, and she was with me the whole time on my paddleboard while I was taking all those photos. Streams and riversides are also good habitat for these species that we've been looking at. Mostly the emergence, the floating leaf species, they require quiet water, but you will find like pickerel weed and some of the others growing on the edges. Randy, I can see you. Am I out of time?
No, we're just coming up on time for questions. Keep talking. You're
Okay,
fine.
okay. But I would like to show you another emergent, submergent rather, species. And this is alga-like pondweed. There are about 23 different species of pondweed out there. And let me just show you a closer up. And again, if you had your jeweler's loupe with you, you could look at the leaves of this pondweed and you would find tiny little veins, and you would know that even though it is submerged, it is a vascular plant and not a algae. There are a lot of pondweed species out there. I certainly am not an expert, but they demonstrate another very common adaptation of aquatic plants, and that is having dimorphic leaves. They have submerged leaves that tend to be that are very narrow and like strap-like. And then when they, I guess, have photosynthesized enough and they've reached the water surface, then they put out these broader blade-like leaves that are better at capturing sun at the water surface. Um, I I just have to mention, of course, there are sedges and rushes and grasses that are an important part of this group of aquatic plants. There are a lot of them, like bayonet rush. This is southern wild rice. Another great habitat are these Randy, tell me to stop when you need me to stop, but
Let's give it like maybe 2 or 3 more minutes here, Kate. How's that?
okay. Just give me a thumbs up when you're like, lady, you're out of time.
Okay.
So another good habitat for these aquatic plants are freshwater tidal marshes. This is one down in Atlantic County. And here we see another species of spatterdock growing, intertidal spatterdock, Nufar avena, very similar to the one that we saw before, but instead of the leaves resting on the water surface, they like stick up out of the air. This marsh represents the biggest, healthiest southern wild rice population in New Jersey. They have you can see cattails growing in with them. These guys also have male flowers on one end of the flowering stalk, female flowers on the other. You can see the male flowers with their anthers sticking out. These little nubs here, the female flowers are very oppressed against the flowering stem, and you can see the little stigmas sticking out there. This is what wild rice, here's a grain of wild rice. They're jam-packed with nutrients. They're pretty big. They're cylindrical. When they shatter and fall off the plant, that cylinder helps them shoot down into the water column where they get into the muck. If you buy wild rice in the store, it's probably grown in Minnesota, where they have the biggest population of northern wild rice in the country. This is wild rice after it has germinated. And again, just like other aquatic plants, first they produce strap-like leaves that grow on the surface. There's some of that intertidal spatterdock growing with it. And then once they've got enough oomph from photosynthesizing, so wild rice is an annual. It grows from seed every season, and it grows from seed and can get to be like 8 or more feet tall in one season. It really is an awesome plant. Provides a lot of food for waterfowl. These are uh, shoot, I forget. They're super common. Anyway, whatever. But they're eating the rice. You can also find flowering aquatic plants in brackish and saltwater environments, like smooth cordgrass. And flowering plants exist in our bays and oceans. Eelgrass and widgeon grass, which I was not able to get a picture of, are marine species that grow in Barnegat Bay and Little Egg Harbor. And a lot of work is being done to restore these plant communities. All right, thank you. How do I?
Thank you. Oh, there are lots of references for folks to take
A
pictures
ton
of
of
there.
references. How do I get out? How do I not share my screen? Am I not sharing my screen now?
You are sharing your screen.
How do I not?
There's a stop share someplace. I can't remember
Oh,
where
I
it is
see it. Okay, sorry. I'm new
There we
at
go.
this.
Thank
Okay.
you so much, Kate. That was truly terrific. You're a wonderful speaker. We do have a bunch of questions. I'm going to condense them a little bit so that we can wrap this up a little bit today. Let's see here. There was one that was really sort of interesting. What is the functional difference between Sparganum americanum and Sparganium eurycarpum, and do they cross?
Oh, I don't know if they cross or not. It can be very difficult to identify them. The seeds are called achenes, and they have little beaks that come off the tip of the seed, and that is one characteristic you could use to tell what species you're looking at. Also, the shape of the leaf, if you look at it in cross section, that's another trait that you would look at to be able to tell what species that you're looking at. But to be honest, I don't know that they cross-pollinate, and I don't know of hybrids, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. So
Yeah, I've not heard of any, but again, it doesn't mean that they don't exist.
right.
There's another individual who put in a pond and it has leaked since, and so now they're left with a lot of wet sand and about 6 inches of water. Is there, and this is a huge question, so we're going to look for an abbreviated answer here, a way to maybe turn that into a tiny little mini marsh or a tiny little bog, and where would they get started with doing something like that? Any ideas?
Oh, well, that's hard for me to say without seeing the site and knowing exactly what's going on. Like, so I assume this is like a pond that is like a plastic. Is it
They said there's
rigid?
marsh marigold and blue flag around the edges where it's still, where it sort of failed.
Yeah,
That they've
yeah.
got that around the edges.
Right, right. I mean, if you can responsibly get your hands on some of those amphibian emergents, sounds like they would like that habitat.
That's what I was thinking also.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Maybe an easier question for someone else, going back to the very beginning of your presentation. How do you encourage moss to grow on your property?
Stop using fertilizer. They definitely like low nutrient situations. And you know what? I mean, I kind of have a little moss garden going at the top of my driveway. I have a gravel driveway. It's sort of just started forming on its own, and I went with it. And I have to go out from time to time and pluck out the vascular plants that I consider weeds in that area so that they don't outcompete them. But yeah, I definitely would steer clear of fertilizer. That would where you want moss to take off, that would be a good place to blow your leaves away, because if you have leaves that are sticking around all winter long and decomposing, then of course they smother the moss. So maybe starting out like where a higher place where leaves don't naturally collect. I mean, that's kind of where you find moss when you're walking around in the woods. So yeah, that's my answer.
Oh, that's interesting. Um, let's see. You didn't really, and this would be a whole different presentation. You didn't really get into invasives, and we know that there's a lot of invasive species that enjoy wetlands in New Jersey. Uh, do you happen to know, or you have a recommendation of a really good guide to invasive aquatic plants in New Jersey?
Um, there are a number of online guides that talk about aquatic plants, how to manage them, talk about like basically pretty much all of your cooperative extensions put out this kind of information. I have some of them listed in the links, so you could go check that out.
And again, all these presentations from today, these are all going to be posted to the NPSNJ website. So you folks can go back and look at all these presentations and revisit the links that Kate put on her
So there's a
presentation.
guide to aquatic plants in Sussex County. There's aquatic plants of mountain lakes in New Jersey that you can find online. But like I said, every cooperative extension pretty much puts out some type of information that you could go find more
And
information.
I'm not sure you want to go into this. The last one we haven't really addressed here, well, two really, is sources of aquatic plants was one, but the other one was a follow-up to the previous question about their local lake board uses silver nitrate to kill invasive plants, and isn't that causing problems for other plants and aquatic life in that lake, probably?
Yeah, I would imagine so, but you know, I have to admit, I'm lucky, and the lake that I get to spend vacation time on is free of invasives at this point, right? And I am an organic gardener, so I honestly can't speak about herbicides because I don't use them. So I'm not a good resource for that.
Yeah. All right. Any great ideas on where to get source aquatic plants?
Oh, right. You know what? It's funny. So at Deep Cut Gardens, we have a koi pond, and it's full of non-native plants. And just this year, I bought a few native aquatics. Am I allowed to say
You can plug.
I can plug East Coast natives? They had a lot of really great aquatic species that I found it difficult to find elsewhere. I can't really speak to how well that's doing because I just bought them this fall, and I kind of have to wait and see, but I'm slowly trying to get rid of the non-native stuff and get this koi pond to be a good native example.
It's tricky with a koi pond.
Yeah, right, because
Yeah.
those koi, they really like to eat the plants.
Yeah. And they're
They
not
really,
native in the first place. So
yeah,
yeah,
they keep messing. Oh, well, we're definitely not getting rid of the koi. Everybody
yeah,
like,
that makes it tricky. That makes it tricky. Well, thanks so much again, Kate, for being part of Weird New Jersey Plants today. This has been a fabulous conference. I am left with the job of closing out the conference this afternoon, and I'd like to thank some folks. I would like to thank all our fabulous speakers. First of all, I would like to thank our president, Kazis Vernalis, for having come up with the idea of Weird New Jersey Plants, which was great. We'd like to thank Weird New Jersey for letting us use their font and their name, Weird New Jersey, and just sort of tacking plants on the end of it. because they already, Weird New Jersey is a thing that existed long before we had the Weird New Jersey Plants Conference. I would like to thank also our almost 1,700 members. Like I said, we're up to 1,661 as of yesterday, for allowing us to do these great conferences, allowing us to have these great speakers, allowing us to support our 15 chapters throughout the state, our webinar series, having our great state programs with amazing classes and trips and hikes and the seed exchange, our podcast, The Wild Story. And if you're not a member of NPSNJ, please consider go to npsnj.org. Consider becoming a member. We even have student members, which are really, really, really economical. Student, family members, supporters, different levels that you can support us. And we thank everyone for coming to the conference today. And we hope you enjoyed it. And thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be a part of it.
Thank you, Kate. Take care now.